The lawyer placed 2 thick files on the polished mahogany table. "This one," he said, tapping the first. "Is your freedom, your tuition, your housing, your life back?" He pushed the second one forward. "And this one? Is there criminal indictment?" He looked at me. "You get to choose how they meet their end." I stared at the paper. For 3 years, they treated me like a structural flaw in their perfect life, something to be covered up and painted over. They thought they had evicted me forever. But they forgot that I am a restoration expert. I know exactly which beams are load-bearing, and I know exactly what happens when you pull them out. I did not hesitate. My hand moved to the second file. "Demolition it is. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker." For 6 months, my world shrank to the interior of a 10-year-old sedan parked near the Pike Place market docks. The smell of that car is something I will never scrub out of my memory. Damp upholstery, cold metal, and the sharp, salty tang of the Puget Sound mixing with the exhaust of delivery trucks. I learned to sleep in 20-minute bursts, waking up every time a headlight swept across the dashboard, terrified it was a cop or a towing company. It was a special kind of torture to be a restoration expert living in a tin can. I spent my days preserving history, saving 100-year-old beams, and bringing original molding back to life for clients, while I was barred from the one home that actually belonged to me. The Craftsman bungalow on Queen Anne Hill. My mother's house. I knew the grain of the oak floors in that house better than I knew the lines on my own palm. I knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway, and exactly how the light hit the stained glass in the entryway at sunset, but I wasn't there. I was here, shivering under a thrift store blanket, watching the rain blur the city lights into streaks of gray and neon. I was here because of a lie so specific, so bureaucratic, that I never thought to question it. Stephanie called it a legacy tax lien. She sat me down at the kitchen table, 3 days after the funeral, surrounded by stacks of official-looking papers with red stamps. She told me my mother had secrets. She said the estate was bankrupt, riddled with hidden debts, and unpaid federal taxes. She looked at me with those wide, wet eyes, and told me we had to liquidate everything just to keep the IRS from seizing the property. She said I had to move out, so they could stage the house for inspectors, to save what was left. And my father? Richard sat right there beside her, nodding like a bobblehead. That was the true betrayal. It wasn't just Stephanie's greed. It was his weakness. He looked at me, his own daughter, and echoed her script perfectly. "You know you're not good with this heavy stuff, Jazz," he said, patting my hand. "You're fragile right now. Stephanie is trying to protect you. You don't need the stress of these numbers. Let us handle the ugly part." They called it protection. I know now it was a demolition job. They were dismantling my reality, brick by brick. People always ask why I didn't fight back right then. Why didn't I demand to see the tax records? Why did I just pack a bag and walk out into the rain? It's easy to judge the structural integrity of a building after it collapses. But when you are living inside it, you don't see the rot until the roof comes down. I know the term for it now. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. It is an invisible chain, stronger than steel. Stephanie had spent years conditioning me to believe I was incompetent. She planted the seeds daily, a sigh when I dropped a spoon, a comment about how I was too artistic to understand finances, a whispered worry to my father that I was mentally unstable like my mother. She built a cage out of my own self-doubt. By the time she told me I was destitute, I didn't feel like a victim of theft. I felt like a burden. I believed I deserved the cold car. I believed that my poverty was just the natural result of my own inability to function in the real world. I sat in that driver's seat, freezing, and I didn't hate her. I hated myself. That was her greatest trick. She didn't just steal my money. She stole my instinct for survival. The 5 a.m. shift at a coffee shop isn't a job. It's a blur of steam, burnt milk, and forced smiles. I was a machine made of caffeine and exhaustion. My hands moved on autopilot, grind, tamp, pull, pour. I didn't look at faces. Faces required energy I didn't have. I looked at credit cards and watches. Then he walked in. The bell above the door didn't just jingle, it sounded like an announcement. He took up space in a way that people from my world didn't. He wore a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than my entire stolen inheritance, and he stood with the posture of a man who builds skylines for a living. George Sterling. My grandfather. The industrial shipping tycoon who hadn't spoken to my father in 10 years because of a petty feud over a business loan. I froze. My hand hovered over the espresso machine. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The last time he saw me, I was 15, and wearing a private school uniform. Now I was 25, gaunt, with dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, wearing a stained apron. Black coffee, he said. His voice was a low rumble, like a ship engine idling. I served him. I didn't say a word. I was terrified that if I spoke, the illusion of my anonymity would shatter. He took the cup. Then, he stopped. His eyes dropped to my chest. Not in a creepy way, but with the laser focus of an auditor, finding an error in a ledger. He was reading my name tag. Jasmine, he said. It wasn't a question, it was a calibration. He looked at my face. Really looked at me. Searching for traces of his daughter. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical blow. But he didn't make a scene. He didn't leap over the counter. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it into the tip jar. Keep the change, he said. He turned and walked out. I stared at the bill. To him, it was a piece of paper. To me, it was 2 weeks of food. It was gas for the heater. It was survival. I didn't cry. I pocketed it. I thought that was it. I thought he was just another ghost from my past, paying a toll and moving on. I was wrong. At noon, when I clocked out, a sleek black town car was idling at the curb. The window rolled down. Get in, he said. I hesitated. My instinct was to run. But something in his voice, the command, the absolute certainty stopped me. I got in. The car smelled like rich leather and silence. Where do you live? He asked. I have a place near the market, I lied. It was the same lie I told everyone. Show me. I tried to direct him to a generic apartment complex, but he saw through me. He looked at my bag, the way I clutched it like it contained my whole life, because it did. He looked at my hands, red and chapped from the cold. Take me to where you sleep, Jasmine. Now. I directed him to the docks. When we pulled up next to my 10-year-old sedan, covered in grime and wet leaves, the silence in the town car became suffocating. He got out. He walked over to my car and peered through the window. He saw the pile of blankets in the back seat. He saw the fogged-up windows. He saw the half-eaten protein bar on the dashboard. He stood there for a long time, the rain beating on his expensive coat. When he turned back to me, his face was gray. The imposing tycoon was gone. In his place was a man looking at a wreckage he had failed to prevent. Get your things, he said. His voice was shaking. You are done here. I didn't argue. I didn't ask where we were going. I grabbed my bag. I left the car. I left the cold. And for the first time in 6 months, I stopped shivering. A shower shouldn't feel like a religious experience. But when you haven't felt clean water on your skin for 3 days, it changes you. I stood under the spray in the guest suite of George's estate until the water ran cold, scrubbing away the smell of the car, the docks, and the shame. I watched the gray water swirl down the drain, taking the victim version of me with it. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel that cost more than my monthly food budget, I wasn't just clean, I was blank. A blank slate ready to be written on. I found George in his study. It was a room built for decisions, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs that smelled like old money, and a desk that looked like a fortress. He didn't look up when I entered. He was staring at a file, his jaw set in a line of granite. Sit, he said. I sat. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It wasn't a check, it was a bank statement. Stephanie told you the trust was empty? He asked. She said there were tax liens. She said the estate was bankrupt. There were no liens. And the trust wasn't empty. He tapped the total line on the page. It has $850,000 in it. The number didn't make sense. It was too big. It was an abstraction. I stared at the commas and the zeros, but... She showed me papers. She showed me the red stamps. She showed you props, Jasmine. She forged documents to convince a 20-year-old girl she was destitute, so she wouldn't have to explain where the money for her plastic surgery and your brother's crypto habits was coming from. Rage is usually hot. This was cold. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingers. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my time. They had stolen the years I spent freezing in a car when I could have been safe. I looked up at him. You knew. You monitored the accounts. Why didn't you stop them? Where were you for 10 years? This was the question that had haunted me. Why did the powerful grandfather vanish? George stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds. He didn't dodge the question. I stayed away because I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, his voice low. Your father. Richard has always been weak. He resented my success. He resented that I paid for everything. 10 years ago, we had a fight. He told me I was suffocating him. He said he wanted to raise his family without my shadow over him. He turned back to me. I thought I was respecting his autonomy. I thought I was giving him peace. I watched from a distance, terrified that if I intervened, I would destroy his confidence and lose you both forever. I told myself that a watchman doesn't enter the house, he just guards the perimeter. He walked back to the desk and placed his hands on the wood, leaning in close. But I was wrong. I mistook silence for peace. I didn't realize that while I was respecting his boundaries, a parasite was eating him alive from the inside. Peace at the cost of safety isn't peace, Jasmine. It's negligence. I let my fear of offending your father outweigh my duty to protect you. And that is a sin I will carry to my grave. He looked at me, stripping away the tycoon persona to reveal a man who knew he had failed the only person who mattered. I cannot buy back the last 10 years, he said. But I can buy the war we are about to start. Are you ready? I looked at the statement. I looked at him. I don't just want the money back, George. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them homeless. He nodded, a dark satisfaction settling in his eyes. Then stop calling me George. Call me partner. The war room was a conference suite on the top floor of George's headquarters. It didn't look like a place for family counseling. It looked like a place where hostile takeovers were engineered. We had forensic accountants, a digital security expert, and a lawyer named Porter who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. We weren't just looking for theft. We were looking for the architecture of the lie. They were careful, the digital expert said, projecting a screen onto the wall, but arrogant. He pulled up a cloud server. To the casual observer, it looked like a digital scrapbook, labeled Family Memories 2018 to 2023. It was filled with thousands of photos of Stephanie's garden parties and Connor's vacations, but it was just a facade, a false wall. Hidden partition, the expert said, encrypted, but the password was underwhelming. He opened the vault. It wasn't pictures, it was a ledger of greed. We watched the numbers scroll by. It wasn't one big heist, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Financial crimes call it smurfing, structuring withdrawals in small amounts to avoid triggering federal reporting alerts. $9,000 here, $4,000 there. Where did it go? George asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. Here, the accountant pointed. $70,000 to a consultant in Miami that's a plastic surgeon. Another $40,000 to tech startups that's Connor's wallet address. He bought NFTs that are now worth less than a used napkin. I watched my inheritance, the money meant to keep me safe, dissolve into Botox and pixels. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had wasted it. They burned my future to keep themselves warm. Then, a notification pinged on the main screen. A new user had logged into the shared drive. Who is that? Porter asked, his hand hovering over the keyboard. It's Claire, I said, my stepsister, the quiet one who studied accounting and never looked me in the eye. We watched in real time as a new folder was dropped into the drive. The folder name was simply Mom's Tools. Why would she give us this? George asked. Because she knows the ship is sinking, I said. And she doesn't want to drown with them. We opened the folder. It wasn't bank records, it was insurance claims. 3 years ago, Stephanie had filed a claim stating that my mother's collection of vintage architectural tools, hand planes, brass calipers, rare drafting instruments had been destroyed in a basement flood. She collected a payout of $65,000. But the next file in the folder was a receipt. A bill of sale dated 2 months after the alleged flood. Stephanie hadn't thrown them away. She had sold them to a private collector in San Francisco for cash. George stood up. He walked to the screen and touched the image of a brass sextant that had belonged to his father. "She sold them," he whispered. "She sold my history." Porter smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "This isn't just theft anymore, Jasmine. This is wire fraud. It's insurance fraud. It's federal." Stephanie thought she had committed a perfect, private crime. She didn't realize she had just handed us a Trojan horse. She had invited federal agents into her life the moment she cashed that insurance check. "Do we call the police?" I asked. "No," George said, turning back to the table. "Not yet. We let them think they've won. We let them walk into the trap." Porter's conference room was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 40 floors above the city, stripping away any place to hide. We sat on one side of the granite table, me, George, and Porter. On the other side, 2 empty chairs waited. They arrived 10 minutes late. It was a power move, or at least, they thought it was. Stephanie walked in first. She was wearing a cream cashmere coat and carrying a designer handbag that I recognized from the forensic accounting report, purchased 3 weeks ago, for $4,000. "My money," Connor trailed behind her, looking bored, tapping away on his phone. He wore a watch that cost more than my college tuition. They didn't look like people facing a reckoning. They looked like royalty inconvenienced by a parking ticket. "George," Stephanie said, her voice dripping with that familiar, poisonous sweetness. She reached out a hand, ignoring me entirely. "It's been so long. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but you know how Jasmine gets. She's always been dramatic." She was doing it. Right here, in front of the evidence, she was trying to gaslight the man whose money she had stolen. George didn't take her hand. He didn't even blink. He just stared at her until she pulled her hand back, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Sit down," Porter said. They sat. Stephanie adjusted her coat, looking around the room with a practiced air of confusion. "I don't understand why we need all this formality. Richard and I were just trying to protect the assets. Jasmine wasn't in a place to handle that kind of responsibility. We were going to give it back once she stabilized." I watched her lying. A year ago, I would have screamed. I would have cried and tried to prove I was sane. Now, I just watched her mouth move. It was fascinating, like watching a specimen under a microscope. She truly believed she could talk her way out of math. "We have prepared a settlement," Porter said, sliding a thick document across the table. "Plan A. You return the remaining assets. You resign as executor. You sign a confession of judgment. In exchange, we do not file immediate criminal charges." Stephanie picked up the pen. She didn't even read the document. She glanced at Connor. A quick, conspiratorial look that I caught. They thought this was the escape hatch. They thought they could sign this piece of paper, walk out the door, and then drain the hidden crypto wallets before we could touch them. They thought they were smarter than us. "Fine," she sighed, signing her name with a flourish. "If this is what it takes to get peace." Connor signed next, smirking at me. "Whatever. Can we go now?" "You may go," George said. His voice was soft, terrifyingly so. They stood up. Stephanie smoothed her skirt, her confidence fully restored. "Jasmine, honey," she said, looking at me with pity. "I hope you find the help you need." They walked out. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the room. "Wait for it," Porter said, checking his watch. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then, the large screen on the wall lit up. It was the Sentinel interface. A red alert bar flashed across the top. "You unauthorized transfer attempt detected. Source, the vault. Partition C, amount. $50,000 destination. Wallet address, redacted. Cayman Islands status, blocked. Flag 99. He didn't even wait to get to the elevator, George said, shaking his head. Connor had tried to move the money the second he thought he was in the clear. But he didn't know we had tagged every single digital asset they controlled. Then, a second window popped up. The compromised family cloud account. An audio file had just been uploaded, a voice note sent from Connor to Stephanie. Porter pressed play. "Mom, I signed the stupid paper. I'm moving the $50,000 to the secure wallet now. They're so dumb. They think they won. We'll be in Cabo by tonight." The room was silent, save for the hum of the server. "That," Porter said, leaning back in his chair, "is intent. That is malice. And that is a breach of the settlement they signed 3 minutes ago." He looked at me. "Plan A is dead. Shall we execute Plan B?" I looked at the red alert on the screen. Execute it. The courtroom wasn't a place of drama, it was a place of cold, hard accounting. Judge Alvarez sat on the bench, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the mountain of evidence Porter had submitted. The settlement breach. The forensic accounting of the vault. The Trojan horse insurance fraud file. Stephanie sat at the defense table, clutching Richard's arm. She was wearing a modest gray suit, trying to play the role of the beleaguered mother. Richard looked gray, his eyes darting around the room, finally realizing he was in a cage of his own making. Connor wasn't there. He had been detained at the airport trying to board a flight to Mexico with a fake passport. "Mrs. Wright," the judge said, not looking up from the papers. "This court takes a very dim view of parties who sign settlement agreements in bad faith. But insurance fraud, that is a matter for the federal prosecutor, who I understand is already building a case based on this evidence." She looked up then. "The court grants the plaintiff's motion for immediate asset seizure. All accounts are frozen. The properties are to be placed in receivership, and frankly, I find your conduct regarding the misappropriation of funds from a vulnerable beneficiary to be repugnant." The gavel banged. It wasn't loud, it was just final. Stephanie turned to Richard. "Do something," she hissed, her voice rising in panic. Tell them we were protecting her." Richard stood up. For a second, I thought he might actually defend her, but then he looked at me, he looked at George, sitting beside me like a stone sentinel. And finally, he looked at the evidence on the screen, the proof that his wife had stolen his daughter's future while he watched TV. "I didn't know," he whispered. "It was a lie, but it was the only one he had left." He pulled his arm away from Stephanie's grip. "I can't help you." Stephanie's face crumpled. It wasn't sorrow, it was structural failure. I watched her disintegrate. Without the money, without the status, without the ability to manipulate the men around her, there was nothing left. She was just a woman in a gray suit who was about to go to prison. The illusion of power is a strange thing. People think it comes from what you own. It doesn't. It comes from who you are. When you strip away the assets from a person like Stephanie, you realize there is no foundation. She was a house of cards built on a swamp, and the tide had just come in. I walked out of the courtroom with George. The rain had stopped. The Seattle sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. We drove to the house on Queen Anne Hill. My key still worked. The inside was a disaster of beige. Stephanie's attempt to modernize a classic. Cheap laminate covered the hardwood. The stained glass had been painted over. It smelled like fake vanilla and lies. George walked in behind me. "We can hire a crew," he said. "Gut it. Start over." I walked to the wall by the stairs and peeled back a corner of the ugly wallpaper. Underneath, the original 1920s plaster was still there, damaged but intact. "No," I said. "I'll do it." I looked at him. "I'm a restoration expert, remember? I know how to strip away the rot to find the good wood underneath. I didn't just rebuild the house, I rebuilt my life. I launched Sterling and Wright Restoration with the recovered funds, specializing in saving historic properties that everyone else had given up on. I hired Claire as my CFO because she was the only one who had tried to help when it mattered. And every Sunday, I meet George for coffee. Not to talk about the past, but to plan the future. We don't talk about Stephanie. We don't talk about Richard. They are just shadows in a house that is now full of light. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, hit that like button. Share this story if you believe that true worth can never be stolen, only temporarily hidden. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.